We live in an age where we have every basketball stat imaginable at the palm of our hand. In a few seconds, I can find out everything ranging from LeBron's stats with or without a headband to Jordan Poole's shooting percentage when there's baddies sitting in the front row. The question I hope to answer in this video is, do these stats, not as much those ones, but the more typical basketball numbers we're accustomed to, do they actually matter as much as we think they do? Or are they distorting what actually happens in the game, and thus what we think of the league's top players? Okay, the first thing I typically do when I wake up in the morning is check the box score of the games I missed the night before. I live on the east side of the country and I'm not staying up to watch a Jazz-Kings game in mid-February. Maybe this isn't the healthiest thing to do right when waking up, but I just want to know if there's anything that I missed that was crazy in the NBA the night before. Now there's other ways I could go about this. I could search headlines, scroll through notifications, or watch highlights, but for some reason the box score seems like the best way to find out what happened without watching the game. I also know I'm far from the only one who does this. Even the most hardcore NBA fans can't catch all the action. Over the roughly 6 months NBA regular season, there's 1,230 games across the league, and on some individual nights, there are 10 plus games starting at similar times. Basketball is also a unique sport where every second of the game can be important. Compare this to other sports like baseball and football. In football, you get to play about every 30 seconds and can manage watching multiple games at the same time, with things like NFL Red Zone and Multiview. Baseball sped up the game, but you still only see a pitch about every 15 to 20 seconds and longer in between at bats. Yes, basketball has a 24-second shot clock, but it takes a greater attention span when you have 7-second offenses and players picking up the ball full court. If you're trying to watch the league on a nightly basis, you'd be lucky to watch 2 full games actually paying attention. And I'm guessing the only people that actually do that are people that are paid to follow the league and want to be basketball YouTubers like myself. It's been well documented how the NBA's viewership is down. The younger generations follow the game by watching quick highlight clips and relying on the stats to tell the truth. I don't know if the majority of our society will ever have the attention span to consistently watch games again. So let's get to what stats we are looking at to draw our conclusions. The typical 3 stats we are looking at are points, rebounds, and assists. There's a million and one advanced stats you can find nowadays, but let's just focus on these for now. In the other major sports, you still have 3 stats that are most commonly used. Baseball has batting average, home runs, and RBIs. Football depends on position. Quarterbacks have yards, touchdowns, and interceptions. Running backs have rushes, yards, and touchdowns. And receivers have receptions, yards, and touchdowns. In hockey, well, I don't know enough about hockey. Is the amount of teeth missing a major stat in the NHL? Baseball probably has the most accurate reflection based on statistics. In basketball, we see players with the ball in the hand almost every possession, racking up high usage rates, helping them boost their stat totals. Role players further down the roster can't match the statistics of the star players without the same minutes and usage rate. Compare this to baseball, where you have a batting order 1 through 9. The guys at the top of the lineup may get an extra at bat every game or two, but for the most part, everyone is getting the same opportunity. The Dodgers can't give Shohei Ohtani someone else's at bats, or he would have had a 100-100 season this year. Imagine if Kevon Looney had to take as many shots as Steph Curry. Also, the MLB and NFL do counting stats, where the NBA does game averages. This makes durability much more of a factor in having a great statistical season in baseball and football compared to basketball. Take LaMelo Ball this year. A lot of people were upset he didn't make the All-Star team and Darius Garland did. We could have a whole conversation on how much a team's record should factor into All-Star voting, but let's just focus on the stats. LaMelo is averaging 28.2 points per game and 7.3 assists per game, while Garland is averaging 21.8 points per game and 6.8 assists per game. But if you look at their entire season totals, LaMelo has 873 points and 226 assists, compared to Garland's 1,070 points and 331 assists. Yes, Garland has played 18 more games, but should he not be rewarded for his availability? At some point it has to be considered. Is Joel Embiid's 23-24 season his best year ever? His averages would say that, but he missed half the year and his team finished as the 7th seed and lost in the first round. No, his best year would be the year before, when he won the MVP. Joel played the 2nd most games of his career and led the league in scoring. Well, scoring in terms of points per game. If you look at total points scored in the 22-23 year, it wasn't anyone in the top 5 of that stat that scored the most points that season. It was actually Jason Tatum at number 6. You decide what's more impressive based off what you value. Just be sure to factor in that feeling of turning on a game and seeing that a superstar is out due to load management. Let's go back to the All-Star reserves this year. We already compared LaMelo and Garland, but that was hardly the only questionable decision. This year left notable players out of the game to include Tyrese Maxey, Domantas Sabonis, and originally Trae Young before he was added as an injury replacement. Look at the numbers on the screen. One of them is Trae Young, the other is Steve Nash's second MVP season in 2005-2006. I know, different eras and different rules. Plus, Nash's efficiency stats puts Trae to shame, but it's hard to fathom that in less than 20 years, a stat line can go from MVP worthy to All-Star Snubs status. That is, until you watch the performances. Ice Trae has become one of the most polarizing players in the league. If you catch him on the right night, you could see him dominant with drives and lobs and put the other team away with clutch shots. You may still remember how he ended Ben Simmons being a competent basketball player on his way to the conference finals. But if you watch the Hawks enough, you'll see Trae being a liability on defense, chucking up 30-footers he has no business shooting. That is, if you watch the games. But like we covered earlier, a majority of the NBA fans aren't seeing all this, and may feel like the league has a personal grudge against him.
Boo! Take y'all ass home.
How about another example? Derrick Rose's amazing MVP season in 2011. Well, that's fairly similar to what Tyrese Maxey is doing right now. And if you look at some of the efficiency numbers, it shapes out fairly even as well. As much as I love my guy Tyrese Maxey and think he should have been an All-Star this year, it's hard to ignore the eye test and what we saw from Derrick Rose that MVP season. Plus, we have to factor in the most important thing in basketball, actually winning games. Derrick Rose's team won 62 games, and this year's Sixers are making fans long for the days of Tony Roden and Jakar Sampson. Okay, I promise I won't bring up the Sixers again. Let's talk about European big men. Nikola Jokic is putting up one of the best statistical seasons ever, but let's put a hold on him for just a second and look what kind of Jokic options you could buy on Temu and Wish. Statistically, Sabonis is having a better year than Şengün. He's leading the league in rebounding for the third straight year, but for the second year in a row, he wasn't selected to the All-Star team. Şengün doesn't do quite as much, but the Rockets' unexpected success almost warranted an All-Star selection considering they have a top 4 seed in the West. No question, Şengün is a great player, but just because the team's having a great year doesn't necessarily mean they should have an All-Star. That's the great thing about this year's Rockets. It's not about just one individual player, but rather how the collective team meshes together, and it can be a different guy every night helping them win games. I really don't feel too strongly about this one way or another, but it really does feel like we should have a stronger criteria for things like All-Star selections and All-NBA teams. Okay, back to Jokic. This year, he's even surpassing the production he put up in the previous 4 years that saw him win 3 MVPs. I promise not to talk about the Sixers, so let's just say the only person that stopped him from taking home the award was Kendrick Perkins. If Jokic keeps these stats up, he'll become just the 3rd player in NBA history to average a triple-double for an entire season, joining Oscar Robertson and his current teammate Russell Westbrook, who did it 4 times. Westbrook's first triple-double season seemed insanely historic at the time, but in recent years, his stats seem to be disregarded more and more. No other player has been accused of stat padding more than him.
I mean, a lot of people make jokes about, whatever, stat padding or going to get rebounds. If people could get 20 rebounds every night, they would.
Russell Westbrook is padding his rebound stats.
What I see, and you see it also, but you so blinded because you're Oklahoma native, and you love you some Russ. He plays so hard. I've never seen anybody play hard as Russ. You never seen anybody steal as many stacks as Russ.
Begs the question, is stat padding even possible? If so, how's it done? Well, a guard like Westbrook won't usually average double-digit boards, but a couple things can factor into Westbrook easily reaching these numbers on a nightly basis. 1, his athleticism and non-stop effort has always jumped off the screen. While it helps to have size, hustle is a must for any great rebounder. But what about the accusations that Westbrook's teammates let him grab the rebound when possible to secure more triple-doubles for their teammate? Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, but I think for another reason that's less superficial. If Westbrook grabs the rebound, he can push the ball in transition and immediately initiate the offense, while if one of the other bigs grabs the rebound, they would need to get the ball back to Russ or another playmaker, giving the defense more time to set up. As for assists, there's still a way to be a ball hog while still putting up huge passing numbers. You may have heard of the term usage rate thrown around when discussing advanced NBA stats. Usage rate is calculated by dividing a player's actions by the total actions of the team when the player is on the court. The result is then multiplied by 100 to get a percentage. Russ posted the highest usage rate ever since the NBA has been able to track the stat dating back to the 70s. His buddy Harden is number 2 all time in his 2018-2019 season and has received a lot of the same criticism that Westbrook has. This also doesn't factor in time spent with the ball in their hands, so just because a player dribbles 20 seconds off the clock before making a move doesn't mean they're racking up a high usage rate. But it's pretty easy to understand. The more time spent with the ball in their hand and the more points and assists they're going to end up with. A lot of teams that have a star player may be more inclined to shoot off a star player's pass than someone else. I remember Michael Malone, the Nuggets head coach, talking about how he wanted his players to look to shoot when getting a pass from Jokic. Again, this is something that's intentional, that will inflate numbers, but it comes out of a place of trying to find a competitive advantage, even if the side effect, if you could call it that, is that it helps the team's star player stats. Westbrook may always have that reputation as a stat padder, but I think the narrative that they sacrificed wins for Russ's stats in those last few OKC years, I just can't agree with that. If Westbrook put up a 27-7-7 that 2017 season rather than his historic 31-10-10, the Thunder are no better off and probably missed the playoffs entirely. In recent years, we've seen more and more crazy stat lines, more triple doubles, more 30-point scores, and a lot more three-pointers. Chalk it up to rules that favor the offense, higher pace, better shooting, or just more talented players. The NBA is in the middle of an offensive revolution. It seemed ridiculous to compare Trae Young's stats to Steve Nash because basketball was played so much differently 20 years ago. Each era basically has to be looked at based off of what was going on at the time. It wasn't uncommon in the 60s for players to average 17 plus rebounds a game. In the modern age, that seems almost impossible. George Gervin led the NBA in scoring in the 1977-78 season while averaging 27.2 points per game. If you put those stats in the 22-23 NBA season, that would have been good for 12th in points per game. So if we already can't compare eras, it wouldn't matter if we made changes to the stats or to the game, right? Well, that's where Adam Silver comes in. The commish already has shown that he's not afraid to make major changes, implementing the play-in and the in-season tournament, and changing the All-Star format practically every year. His newest idea, 10-minute quarters.
Something else that I'm a fan of, and I'm probably in a minority, as we get more involved in global basketball, the NBA is the only league that plays 48 minutes. And I am a fan of 4 10-minute quarters. I'm not sure that many others are. I mean, putting aside what it means for records and things like that.
Could this be an attempt to make games easier to watch, taking up less of our time and matching the attention span of younger generations? There's a lot of potential issues with this, ranging from ticket prices to TV contracts. A lot of people would be unhappy, but Silver mentions the historical impact this would have on our record books. There's also been talk of shortening the season, which would have a similar impact on these similar things. Would it matter though? On some things, yes. No one would ever come close to touching LeBron's all-time scoring record, Wilt's 100-point game. Triple doubles would be much more difficult. We would also have to recondition our minds to seeing games end in the 70s and 80s again. Like most fans, I'm not in favor of shorter quarters. If I'm paying those ticket prices to go to a game, I want to get my money's worth. If you're watching the game on TV, that probably just means 8 more minutes of gambling ads. To this point, I've thrown out enough obscure statistics. What can we do about it to make the most common stats actually represent the production of NBA players? Those advanced stats are too confusing to explain to the casual fan, and you shouldn't have to have a bachelor's degree in mathematics to understand them.
I understand nothing.
One thing I would really like to see is the scoring champ go to the player who scores the most points over the season, and not just the player that finishes with the highest points per game average. Hopefully this will cut back load management and incentivize the best players to get on the court as much as possible. We can still look at the averages, and the basketball nerds can still have their advanced stats. I think it is the NBA's job to keep the game somewhat similar as time passes. They did make some corrections to the defensive rules a couple years ago, so I give them credit for that, when scoring really started to get out of hand during that 22-23 season. Whether you like it or not, the NBA's history lives on through the record book. Yes, of course, we celebrate the championships and watch the game tapes to see what happened, but there's no footage of Wilt's 100-point game. You can't watch every play from Oscar's triple-double season. Those things live on through the stats and historical records. As a league, I don't think you want to end up like the NFL has with passing, where the game has changed so much that the old legends are passed in the record books by the average modern players, where Matt Ryan has better stats for the most part than Dan Marino. I guess my point in this video is that the preservation of the game and the way the stats come across matters. When I'm having a basketball debate with someone 20 years from now, defending a player like KD, it's a lot easier to bring up his stats and achievements rather than telling someone to watch hours of highlights or game tape. Maybe I'm overthinking this as a casual, nerdy NBA fan, but it feels like that the stats of today matter less than ever. As always, thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a like for the video. See you next time.